Well, moving on now, for all the good that social media networks have done, it's increasingly difficult for governments, individuals, and the companies themselves to ignore the dark sides. Numerous studies show links between regular social media use and a decline in mental health. Well, my guest today, Isa Watson, had her own reckoning with the dangers behind relying on the virtual world for validation and the toll that endless spiral can take on real-life relationships. So to address it, she founded Squad, a mobile application centered on nourishing friendships, and her recent book, Life Beyond Likes, Logging Off Your Screen and Into Your Life, also shares guidance on how to reduce social media use. Isa, thank you very much for joining us today, very early from New York.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Well, can you tell us more about your background first? How did you end up transitioning from careers in chemistry as an executive on Wall Street to becoming the founder of a tech startup and also writing your book about the dangers of social media?
Yeah, very much like most parents want, right? I checked the boxes for all the things my parents wanted me to do. I was one of the youngest published chemists in the world at 19, got my MBA at MIT in the US, and transitioned into Wall Street, where I was a right-hand executive to the number of C-suite leaders, building big businesses, big products, doing all the things I was supposed to do. And this was around the time social media started to really kind of come out and become really like a personal branding tool. So what did I do? I was posting, hey, I got this top 30 under 30 award. I got this top 40 under 40 award, this top 100 alumni at MIT award. And the one thing that I realized was, in retrospect, my parents, they sponsored a bus trip for kids to visit colleges every year. They were the chaperones. And this year, the bus ran off a straight road, flipped over, and ejected both my parents out the front window. And my dad didn't survive that. And it was a very lonely place when I hit rock bottom in life, to find out that to discover that I just really hadn't been stabilizing in my real life relationships. And when I finally got myself up to talk about it, the fact that I was living this fabulous life online, and not really investing in my real life, I learned that it was a much bigger problem than I had ever anticipated.
So tell us then about the idea behind Squad. What's the transition between that realization, that very difficult realization you had, and creating this app? In other words, how is it different than other apps that kind of started out as a method to simply keep in touch with friends, to nourish relationships?
Really great question. So we say with Squad that it captures the power of friendship, and it's the easiest and most fun way to talk to your friends away from social media. Before we had the COVID pandemic, we were in a loneliness epidemic, and we're so far down that epidemic that the U.S. Surgeon General equates the loneliness to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And almost a third of millennials and Gen Z say that they don't have a close friend. And friendship was one of the biggest things we were losing. And so with Squad, it's always going to be small. You can only have up to 12 people in your squad, and it's only the people that you bring in. So you can't discover people whose phone numbers you don't have, who you haven't accepted into your squad, et cetera. So the idea is, how do we make habits around friendship maintenance, more easy, more fun? It's voice only, voice messages, voice calling, voice updates, et cetera. But genuinely speaking, the most easy and fun way to talk to your close friends every day. And that's not what social media is. 90% of social media users just lurk. That means they just scroll and they don't post anything, and it's not really a connection tool.
The average millennial has about 8 social media accounts. So if the goal is to reduce dependence on social media, is it not somewhat paradoxical, if not maybe a little bit counterproductive, to use an application to do so? How do you find balance between reducing screen time, but also maybe needing to rely on some of the advantages of our screens?
Well, the reality is that we live in a very mobile world. Our parents and our grandparents usually stayed in kind of one place. And so, quite frankly, my best friends don't live in New York City. They live in Houston, they live in Boston, they live in Los Angeles. And so, there is some need for, technology as it pertains to keeping in touch with our friends. But I still maintain that the core thesis of Squad is really around deepening, and that is very distinct from all the social media platforms that are around broadening. With Twitter, with Facebook, with Instagram, et cetera, with TikTok, you're trying to impress a bunch of people you will never laugh in the same room with. And that is just very different and distinct from the way that you even build your squad, to the way that you interact with your squad.
So I'd like to change gears, if we can, to talk about some recent news stories, especially as a tech founder. That's the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and how that may have impacted your company. Many viewers actually may not know how important SVB was how important it was, rather, to Black business owners in particular. What is it about SVB that set it apart from other banks for that demographic?
Yeah, for sure. Silicon Valley Bank was, the darling bank to about half of venture-backed U.S. startups. And, I think it's no secret that, Black people have historically a difficult banking relationship in the U.S., having been, people get denied for mortgages or, lines of credit when, they're qualified, et cetera. And so with Silicon Valley Bank, already the fact that like most Black founders, I think, get less than 1% of venture capital in the U.S. Silicon Valley Bank, outside of banking some of the top venture startups, they were really, really good at bringing us into the ecosystem and being a really strong partner for us in a way that felt very inclusive, in a way that felt, just imperative to our business. And so for the collapse to happen as suddenly as it did and at the magnitude that it did, it was definitely a hit to Black founders, but also just founders in general. This is, like I said, a beloved bank of the startup community in the U.S.
What do you think its collapse then means for Black business owners like yourself?
Quite frankly, we're a little bit scattered on this, right? I talked to a lot of, venture backed Black founders, whose companies range from 10 million to $1 billion in valuation. And, our consensus has been generally like, we're not quite sure, what this means. Is there going to be a Silicon Valley Bank replacement? That's a question. But more so the question is, for now, we'll just diversify across a handful of banks. And that's kind of been everyone's response. They're like, we don't know who's going to replace them. So in the meantime, let's just, bank with a handful of people.
To finish, I'd like to ask you, what do you think is in the future for the relationship between individuals and social media networks? Do you see any big changes in the works coming? And if so, how do you see yourself fitting into that as a business owner in the future?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, I think that a lot of existing social media platforms are essentially broadcast platforms where you're trying to reach a bunch of people and trying to impress a bunch of people you'll never laugh in the same room with. And Squad, the big white space in social media is deepening, is actually friendships, which we've actually stepped away from because we conflate consumption with connection in a big way. And I even write about in my book, Life Beyond Likes, logging off your screen and into your life, about, not just how to elevate our awareness around how social media makes us feel. If we post something and we don't get a bunch of likes, oh my God, was it the wrong thing to post? But also, how to reinvest and center our joy. So I think friendships is a big untapped source of joy. I'm also a competitive skydiver. That's a big source of joy. And I think that the pendulum is swinging back for us to just kind of focus on our happiness more, because people are tired of being lonely and sad.
Isa Watson, author of Life Beyond Likes, logging off your screen and into your life, and also founder of Squad. Thank you so much for getting up early and joining us here on France 24.
Thank you.